All right, man. It's going to be a spicy one today. We're getting into dicey territory, talking about sales advice, sales influencers, and the like. And unfortunately, now with the growth of the channel, I think one from the outside looking in would call us influencers. I know I don't feel that way. I try not to feel that way. But yeah, anyway, definitely going to dive into, like, for everyone watching, I think, we try and provide a ton of value with YouTube. And we're also going to fall into some of the categories we talk about today. But I want to help people understand some of the pros and cons of online training, influencer training, books, and all these different things, because I think there's a lot that you can mean well, but actually following their training or not understanding who you're getting training from can actually hurt you more than it can help you. But Chris, what are your thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, no, I think obviously this is, we're kind of known for just being 100% transparent with people. And so I don't think fundamentally there's anything wrong with training. I think the thing that's wrong is in that there aren't clear enough instructions on how to actually implement the training. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I'm guilty of this myself, and I think you are too. And like earlier on in our careers, everybody has this tendency to like go find at least like top performers or like high performers or aspiring high performers. They want to be top performers. And so the thing that people tend to do is they go online. They think that like buying all these great courses, buying all sorts of like sales training and all sorts of different things from like maybe people are top performers and they're selling like their secrets or ingredients for success or whatever else, right? Yeah. And I'm not here to say that like that's bullshit by any means. Like I'm sure that what they're doing is working for them. Mm-hmm. The problem is when people go out and they buy, one course from this guy, one course from this person, another template from this other person. And then like by the end of it, they're going to have like 10 different, 10 different pieces of completely different advice. Yeah. And so now people are left with this sort of like, it's almost like they're trying to piece together everything into like one holistic way and something that works for them. Yeah. And so they end up sounding like not themselves. Mm-hmm. Right. And this is something that we spoke about a little bit last week too, is like about the importance of having frame, the importance of, finding your own style and being super consistent with it. Yeah. Because if I go into a sales call, and this doesn't just apply for account executives, right? Mm-hmm. This also applies to SDRs if you're trying to break in or whatever else. Let me just take a super holistic view of it. Let's say that I was trying to break into tech sales. If I'm going into like the first 3 conversations, being very, very like outgoing, being super chill, and then if I'm meeting the same people again, and I completely changed the way that I act because I read in a guide somewhere that I should do X, Y, Z, yeah, they're going to be extremely thrown off. In the same way, if you're talking to a prospect, if you're changing up your sequences, how you're writing your sequences, your messaging, your templates, your cold calling. And so again, this is a very broad topic. Yeah. But I think that's the biggest mistake that I see. But I guess curious, like how do you sort of see?
Well, I think there's a few things, right? Because one, there's a lot of people right now, and I mean, some could say we fall into this bucket where we started making content right as the market was insane, which is true. But, at least in my case, having had a past career as an engineer, kind of straddling the line between engineer and sales engineer as well. Like, I think, I've seen a lot of the industry, and the more I bought these different courses, let's put it that way, there was a lot that was missing, that it was like, oh, it's actually just this easy. And I think a lot of these influencers get into it and they take a step back, or like we've seen some of these influencers that I bought courses from change companies, fail, and go back to the company they were at because they didn't realize at the macro they were in one of the best companies at the time. Which has a lot to do with their success, and I might add our success. Like, mm-hmm. I don't think there's no shame in saying like being at a great company, you're more likely to be a rep that's crushing your quota and doing all of these great things, right? So I think that's one element of it, and then absolutely, like for instance, and again, I say this because I've invested like thousands in training at this point. I was obsessed the first 2 years I could before I ever made a single piece of content myself in taking in everything I could. I think the challenge is, for instance, some people would talk about frame, or some people would, say, hey, if you get this pricing objection, do this. And it's like, it's really not that simple because, for instance, like, I've seen people who teach like being, going for status or like having a sense of like power over the prospect. Those are games that work in like more transactional, faster paced, smaller deal cycle types of deals. So if you're selling a $50,000 or less product to like a small company or a mid-market company, you may be able to play that pricing game because you have direct access to power and all of these different things. When you get to a bigger mid-market company or you go to an enterprise company, good luck trying to have status over someone and trying to like, you know, play little like games of like, look at, you know, trying to like power them into, you know, showing you don't care or, you know, really pressing them on why it's all of these different things. So that's the funny thing to me with all of this advice is like, I respect the person who comes at it more from like a framework level and says like, try this and iterate on it. What I don't like is seeing a lot of the people that are like, oh, it's this. Or conversely, we're even seeing platforms where it's like, we have 10 thought leaders as a part of our community. And it's like, who gives a shit? So you're telling me I'm going to get advice from someone who sells a sales tool, and then someone from Oracle, and then someone from a company I haven't heard of, and then someone from like an internet marketing company. Like, how is that going to build cohesively into anything?
Yeah.
And then last thing I'd say with these offerings, and I'll hand it back to you, is like, especially for these influencers, I've gotten some good nuggets out of, you know, some courses that are $100, $200, whatever. But the fact that there's no live support, the fact that I can't tap their brain, and I get it because they're just one person and they make some great posts, but if they're not willing to role play and help you flush out the idea further, to your point, then I'm left taking what they say and then trying it and sounding really horrible on the phone because I'm like, oh, this person said I should try this. And then I've got to figure out over the course of 3 months, you know, how to work that into my workflow when maybe I shouldn't have in the first place because they're selling to a completely different person. So, yeah.
No, I think, and again, like we're, you know, the reason why we're saying this too is like, you know, the first iteration of, you know, higher levels of like the very first, I mean, over a year and a half ago when we were first getting into this, there were certain things where we had a strong assumption about like, hey, this is going to absolutely crush because it worked really well for us, right? And then I think like we went through enough students, we had enough people go through this process, and you realize like actually, you know, it's completely different depending on vertical, segment, company. I mean, there's so many factors that play into this.
Yeah.
And so the reason why we're talking about this is because we lived it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a big thing that we're focused on now is instead of like teaching people the golden silver bullet that's going to carry you through your entire journey of, you know, tech sales all the way until you make $1 million, you know, and whatever else. Like, I think instead of that, we're more so looking at it from a framework perspective. And so I think there's nothing wrong with buying training. I mean, the fact that people are investing in themselves is a great sign. That's a proxy for success, right? But I think what it comes down to is like, you have to understand how to take the training and apply it to your specific company, your specific segment. You need to be able to identify, like, let's say that there's a top performer at a really hot company. I love that you made that point. For instance, the first thing that I think now, having also spent a lot of money on training online, is, okay, first of all, you know, what is the segment that he's in? Or well, actually, like, let me take a step back. What is a company, right? Is it like a super hyper growth company that's just been absolutely crushing for the last like 2.5 years where, you know, frankly, most of it is probably just order taking? Because, I can put any type of messaging into, you know, my sequence, and it's going to be mostly about like, hey, is it the right time for these specific companies? They know who you are. They know you're blowing up the entire industry and changing everything up. So like, of course, I can put whatever I want into my messaging and I'm probably still going to get some wins, right? But I go into a company that doesn't have a strong product market fit. I try to pull off the same stuff and it's not going to work, right? I think you go through enough training and you kind of get like a sense of like, okay, what is good, what is bad, right? What is going to work in a more generalized sense and what isn't. So I think maybe even like flipping it a little bit, if you're out there, you're looking for training, you know, what I would do personally is, I mean, before I even go and look at training, something that we put a strong emphasis on is if you are already at an organization, right? What I would do is I would go find the top performers, figure out what are the top performers doing, right? What is separating them? I mean, I just started at Vanta, you know, as an account executive. And so what I've been doing for the past like 2 months obsessively is trying to look at the top performers, trying to see, hey, what are they doing? Like, how do they run their entire deal cycle from A to Z? What is every single step from whenever they come through as an inbound or whatever outbound sequence that they're using to book that meeting? I'm literally breaking it down at every single level to understand, okay, what is actually making these top performers be top performers? Listening to the gong calls, all those different things. Because I can go out and I can find, you know, some influencer who's been very successful at a company that's been absolutely crushing it. and I can take the same things, put it into my workflow. It's not going to work.
Yeah.
You know, unless that company is in the exact same vertical as me, is on the exact same trajectory as my company, has the exact same growth rate, it's not going to be the same.
Yeah.
And inversely as well, like let's say that I was at a company that wasn't doing as well, but the vertical is completely different. Even then, if I take something that's been crushing for another vertical, it's like we talk about this a lot, right? Like if you're selling sales tools to sales leaders and you go and try to do the same stuff with like a technical persona,
Yeah.
they're literally gonna like, I mean, it's bad. You know, I'm not even gonna say it.
Yeah.
But it's going to be bad. They're not going to be very receptive to that stuff.
Yeah.
And in the same way, you can't talk to a sales leader like you would to a technical persona.
Yeah.
So there's so many nuances to this. And I think if you are in the sales space, if you're selling a sales tool, then yeah, you have a little bit more flexibility because like sales leaders look for these little cool things that are different, you know?
Yeah.
You have a lot more flexibility there. But if you're selling to anybody outside of that, then yeah, it's going to be like a tough battle up, you know, it's just not the easiest thing in the world.
Yeah. 100%.
But I guess I'm curious, like having gone through a lot of training yourself, what do you look for now? Like what's important to you? Like when do you feel like you've gotten sufficient amount of value out of something? Like what does that type of content need to have?
Yeah, well, the way that I think about it now is, you know, when I first started, I was at 0. And so taking in a lot of input was really great because I needed to try a bunch of things to kind of like find my style. An analogy I've given to some of our students though now, especially in the SDR and AE cohorts is, you know, LeBron James, not that I'm LeBron James of sales, but like, you know, LeBron James is not every off season trying a completely new jump shot technique. You know, Tiger Woods, when he was in his prime, was not taking the off season to try 10 different swing techniques as well. Now, early on, when you're developmental, sure, you got to try a bunch of things and find what works consistently well. And then again, learn from the best also, you know, but again, also LeBron James is not going to be trained by a 5'5" point guard. You know, he's got a unique body style. He's got to learn how to use his body specifically, which I think goes to all the analogies that we have. Now, when it comes to coaching for me, you know, aside from the tactics, and again, debatable on the value in terms of what I got, was it worth the cost? But if nothing else, I think just putting all that time and energy into sales really helped me progress a lot. Now it's more, you know, for me, I think the people that I get the most from are either challenging me directly, usually within my organization because they've been there and done that. I've learned a ton from people that have, you know, 15 years of experience now, which is kind of the next clip for me in terms of looking ahead because I am at 5 years of experience directly in sales, coming up on 10 in tech. And I think aside from that, if it's not the direct people challenging me in my company, which I really enjoy, it's the people who can make me think about something differently. They're not saying, hey, I changed this one subject line and I got my, you know, open rate to increase by 13%. They're saying like, hey, I lost this deal because of this problem. And had I asked these questions or had I done this differently, I think I could have gotten a different outcome. You know, so this made me realize and approach my deal fundamentally differently, making sure that if I were to go into a POC or if I were to give a proposal, I had to have these different things in check. And again, and they're also not saying it from the like, now I do this religiously every single time, but I think it's a good thing you can take like a nugget or two to implement into your workflow, as opposed to a lot of the courses, you know, I've seen, especially early on, again, were good because I was at 0. But now I'm not going to buy like a discovery masterclass that teaches me how to run a discovery call because like I've done a million of them, you know? So it's like, there's just an element that like, I'm not going to get anything from seeing 3 different sentences. What I would prefer at this level is, and I think, again, going to why we constructed things the way we did, is the live coaching, the ability to kind of like mimic what has worked and take what you think will work well, but then challenge that in a community, get a people of trusted top performers. That's really the only, like, I'll be honest, I don't even really read sales books that much anymore because I spent so much time for the first 3 to 4 years of my career doing that. Now I'm just really focused on the deals and really focused on moving things forward. So that's my outlook.
Yeah, and I think experience is the best teacher, right? I mean, honestly, like, I purposefully tried to put myself in as many awkward positions as possible. I mean, even now that I'm ramping into a new role, I'm learning brand new technology. I knew that, like, hey, I can sit and have an SC on the call and I'll probably like just turn off my camera while she or he is demoing. And yeah, I mean, that's super cozy, but I'm not going to learn anything. So I had some interesting calls. It's pretty bad calls at first. But, you know, like when you get into those uncomfortable situations, you kind of like realize, okay, this is what I need to do. This is what I need to change. So I think like without sounding too zen, getting into like some uncomfortable situations, but I think also the recipe for success completely changes. Like just like what you were saying, you would never at this stage in a career go and buy like, you know, like a cold calling class or like a discovery class or whatever else, right? Like it doesn't make sense because like you have so much, you found your style, right? You know what works, and it works consistently across different, you know, like verticals, different niches, different product, all those different things, right? And so I do see a lot of people though, they see this like enterprise strategic AE, right? He or she is selling a course on whatever it may be, on like what they're doing to be top sellers. And then I see like somebody who's either trying to break into tech sales or as an SDR buy that course, and there's nothing really like applicable to, you know, whatever they're doing in their day-to-day operations. Like whether it's breaking in, I mean, even if they're like an AE, but they're at the corporate level or SMB level or even mid-market, I mean, there's such a big difference at every single one of those segments to where like, if you take something that's working in enterprise, you try to apply it in, for instance, like what I'm doing right now, I'm mostly like, you know, smaller deal sizes, smaller companies. It's very, very high velocity. I mean, there's a lot of things that you're teaching me that's obviously working, but there's also things like where if I were to go and try to do that, it would just absolutely not work. And vice versa, even more so for you, if you took some of the things that are crushing in like an SMB velocity motion, try to do it at like an enterprise stage, I mean, you know, like they would quite frankly tell you to go fuck yourself, right? So I mean, again, sorry for the but it's really like there's a massive difference in how you do things. And so that's another huge mistake I see people making is buying courses from folks that quite frankly are so far distanced from where they're at. And also something else to call out, like honestly, this is something that I learned a couple of years ago, but I feel like when you first go through something and you do it successfully, that's probably the best time for you to actually teach somebody else how to do it. And so in the same sense, like I see some of these strategic reps, they're so far distanced from the reality of what tech sales is today at those more younger levels or earlier stages that they think they have a really strong impression of like what should an SMBA do today or what should an SDR do today. Like we see this all the time, directors of sales, like head of sales, VPs of sales, giving advice on like what SDRs should do when they were SDRs like 15 years ago. And it's just like, they don't even know, like they didn't even have tools back then. Like they didn't have outreach, they didn't have sales left. They didn't even have like, they had to like use their phones, which is like crazy, like to just cold call people, like look up all this stuff in like a phone book. And so like, it's just changed so much. Right? So again, that was very drawn out, but
it's good. And I mean, I agree. I mean, you know, when I think that's one thing that, you know, we kind of got lucky and fell into when we realized that we should really do this. And, you know, for the last 2 years now on nights and weekends, build this entire thing out is I do think what's cool is, you know, I've seen some people that, to your point, were executives for 5 years, right company, right time, more power to them. And they're like, look at how much money I made. And they're trying to teach SDRs and AEs of like how to do things when they haven't been on the front lines for like 7 years. And then on top of that too, it's like, you know, there's so many things we could get into, but yeah, it's like they'll circumvent that by bringing in other people. And then again, then you get to the problem of you're learning one thing from this person that sold to this market segment at the right time, and then one person from a completely different company trying to like backfill in, you know, information and how to run things. But I mean, I'll even be honest on my own personal situation with the communities that we run. Like, I think breaking in, that's a skill that never goes away, you know, in terms of like keeping fresh, being ready for interviews. I think that's one skill that I don't think really gets old outside of maybe performing at your absolute peak in an interview. But outside of that, you know, when it comes to the SDR role directly, like I'm really glad we documented it, because I will say, like, I am kind of removed from the day-to-day, and something we see in our live calls and community as well is a lot of times like, yeah, we'll chime in and give our 2 cents, but the best thing we see happening is active SDRs that are the literal number ones in their entire company, like sharing information because they're not all competing for the next AE role. And I think that's a great situation to foster and community to foster. And I think even going and one point of many on the training, you know, if you're out there and you're looking for training or you're not performing, I think it's really important as a starting point, if you can, to try and find people and or a community that are very, very similar to yours. And there's so many ways you could break that down. But what I would say for anyone that's maybe early to mid stages of your career, where this training really like falls down, in my opinion, and where I think so many people miss, myself included. I spent a year like really struggling in the enterprise space when I first broke into it, because all of these discovery guides, all of these, here's how to really understand your prospect's pain. Like, okay, sure, like those are valuable and you do use those. What it doesn't teach you at all, and what's really rare in the enterprise space, is working into an account and understanding like who you should even be talking to in the first place. And that's where there's really not a ton of training and offerings around that, I'll be honest with you. I do think like talking to reps in the field and learning from my peers and just calling friends that are at different companies is the way that I train now as well. But it's like, you know, there's so many simple analogies, but like if you're running a discovery call with a senior engineer who's 20 levels below the directors of Amazon, you're basically wasting your time, right? Or if they're, you know, if they're not willing to take you to the next level, but they want a trial, not worth your time. And I think that's a really hard distinction when you're 1 to 3 to 4 years into your career. Even selling to some mid-market companies, you're usually 2 to 3 levels away from power at most. And so you're used to running an effective discovery because you've been talking to the person that's going to sign the paper at the end of the day.
Yep.
And when you get thrust into the enterprise environment, or just a different, more challenging persona, or all of these different things, you think that the key to success is running a good discovery call. And that becomes, I would honestly say that's, you know, at the SMB level, I'm just making it up here, like 50% of the deal. At the enterprise and more strategic levels, that's like 20-ish% of your success, if that. And there's so many factors, right? If you're a startup, I would argue it's more important. If you're a large company and you're trying to sell a new product of your entire portfolio into an account, then I think the discovery is less important because you already have tons of relationships, right? And these are the dynamics that are so hard to teach in a pre-recorded course, I guess. So at the highest level, I think, you know, especially as you progress your career, if you've really put in the work 2 to 3 years in, now it's time to really, really just, more than anything else, filter out the bullshit, filter out the people who aren't doing exactly what you're doing, and really try to hone in on top performers as, I would say, the widest gauge. So sure, pick the top performer's brain from a different vertical because maybe they give you one insight that you can use. But if they're not a top performer or they're not selling in your industry, be very skeptical of taking the advice and thinking, oh, that's a great idea, I should do that right away. So yeah.
And I think now I don't start looking for advice until I'm in a spot internally where I'm already like hitting my number, at least at a baseline, right? Because I know anything apart from my internal organization is going to be a waste of my time. And so like, for instance, right now, I'm just looking at like again, like success leaves clues, right? So where I'm at right now, it's a hyper growth company. So I have the luxury of having a lot of inbound, for instance, which is awesome, right? But like the challenges there is completely different. I need to figure out like, hey, where do I spend my time? Because I have so many deals in flight. I have so many things in motion. I almost need to like focus in on like, what are the highest priority deals? Obviously, it's very easy to look at it and say like, hey, this is the biggest deal size, so I'm just going to go focus on that. But there's so many other levers to it. But in the same way, like, again, I'm coming back to this one more time. But for another person who's maybe like in a less warm segment, right? If they spend all their time like perfecting their discovery call and all these different things, or their follow-up, it's not necessarily going to move the needle, right? In the same way for me, like, I don't necessarily need to go out and create the most perfect sequence in the world to get more outbound. My problem is figuring out like, hey, what are the top priority accounts? What are the top priority deals that are in flight? And then spend more time on them. So I think for anybody else to like kind of digest it into layman terms for other folks out there, you know, if you are actively employed in tech sales, if you are an SDR, AE, whatever else, right? Even if you're, again, if you're breaking in, you obviously don't have the luxury of looking internally. But to your point too, I think there is like a, you know, there is a very rigid, simple process you can follow to actually get results. I don't think that's going to necessarily change. We talk about that all the time, so I'm not going to bore people out there with it. But if you are actively employed, look internally, get to a baseline where you're hitting your number. And then when I go out and I start looking for advice from other people, I already kind of like know that like this isn't necessarily going to move the needle too much for me, but I've already exhausted all the things internally to get myself to a point where, hey, I'm hitting my number. I have the luxury now of going out and experimenting with different frameworks, different ways of cold calling, different ways of attacking a discovery call or whatever else, right? But I also have a baseline, like I have my style in place now.
Yeah.
a style that I can consistently replicate to get results.
Yeah.
If I start going out and I look for frameworks, or courses, Gumroad content, whatever else, like before I'm at that stage, it's going to be a bunch of noise to me, quite frankly.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to take what this LinkedIn influencer is saying. I'm going to take what this LinkedIn influencer is saying. I'm going to take what this VP of sales is saying. I'm going to try to like bundle it into like my vertical without factoring in all these different things.
Yeah.
And that is when I see people messing up the most by far.
Yeah.
Like they're not going to hit their number or anything else. So
Yeah.
that's usually what I like to tell people is, hey, focus internally. That's what we teach our students too, right? I mean, a lot of our coaching and internal training inside of higher levels is actually not focused on giving you like silver bullets.
Yeah.
We have templates and all sorts of things, but we emphasize this is how you figure out what's working internally.
Yeah.
This is how you break down the data. This is how you use the tools to actually figure out like, hey, what are other folks doing?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because if somebody is crushing it, and we also, I mean, again, I'm not going to like, this isn't like the whole pitch of like why you should join higher levels or whatever else, but there is a lot of stuff to this.
Yeah.
Because you can waste your time and buy all sorts of coaching and training and try to implement it and it'll fail.
Yeah.
So again, that's a very drawn out way of saying like focus internally first.
Yeah.
And try to look for like the top performers, specifically like if somebody is in your segment, in your territory, those are the people who I would try to emulate the most.
Yeah.
And you also start to identify who's lucky, who's getting a ton of inbound, right? Or what type of leads are they targeting?
Yeah.
Not to get too deep there, but
No, it's good. And I think like, one of the things when I think about some of the SDRs I know that are the most successful is they're putting themselves in the best position at all times to have the highest likelihood of generating an opportunity or calling a prospect that will actually pick up. And I think, there's so many levels to this, and I think it gets really difficult to have a one size fits all when you go to enterprise, when you go to strategic. That turns more to the personas and the types of conversations you're having. Are those conversations the ones you should be having? Whereas the SDR, I think it's information overload. How do I know that what I'm doing right now is the best thing that I should be working on? And I don't think many SDRs, as an example, just have the experience to even ask the right questions and think about that properly. But again, this goes to everything we talked about. When you get to the enterprise segment, it changes. But I think that's the biggest thing that's lacking is like, when you build, for instance, like we talk about a lot of the deals that we have with each other, and you come to me and ask me, how would you phrase this or how would you do this? It doesn't mean that you're going to take that. You already come to me, and you already have an idea. It's like you've either pre-drafted an email or you've thought about how to say it, and you're just triangulating and almost stress testing your own idea. I don't know if this is fair to say. I'm like kind of speaking for your subconscious here.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
But it's like, I think until you have that internal compass, just buying like pre-recorded modules and not getting live feedback is not going to help you.
Yeah.
Not having someone consistently challenge you is going to be a really difficult thing. So again, at the end of the day, there's no perfect answer here. Like, and all respect to the creators, I have bought their courses, and I might add, like, I don't have a naive expectation that when I buy someone's course, every single module is going to be life-changing. Like if I spend $100 on a course and I get 3 good nuggets out of it, that's a win in my book. I might add that,
Yeah.
But I think that's the most difficult thing I saw the more I got into it is it's like, for instance, like there's some really great sales books, and there's many I'd recommend. Qualified Sales Leader, Challenger Sale, Customer-Centric Selling. Those are some good classics that are a great point. But when I started buying these modules, that was honestly the biggest gap for me too, is it's like I can pay $20 for this book, or I can pay $150 for these modules. These modules are maybe a little bit more to the point, but that's it. I can't even comment on the videos. There's no community, or there is a community, but it hasn't been active since February of last year, and so anyway, I don't want to make this like a rag fest and neither act like we are perfect either. But I think hopefully if someone's in a situation where they're looking at training, that gives you a little bit of a barometer to say, should I do training? What training should I do? Who should I follow? And be a little bit more diligent because it's like the floodgates open, and it's not all bad. Like when I go back to, I promoted from SDR to account executive in 3.5 months, I was drinking from the fire hose. So I bought a lot of I bought some frameworks from some people. I bought a discovery masterclass. And at the end of the day, I ended up probably throwing out a lot of that specific stuff away. But at the time it was perfect. It was what I needed because I had a good manager, but there's only so much they can do when they're managing 15 people. And so I really took it upon myself. And I think it goes back to your point. If you do get to that point where you've done enough, you've really tried to exhaust all your options, then I would really start to look towards training, and ideally one with live training from someone relevant to your industry. So
yeah. And I think like just, you know, for anybody else out there, sales is not like a science. It isn't. It's an art. And so when you buy a course from somebody, obviously we try to distill it down into science as much as we possibly can. But the truth is there is no perfect framework to work for every single vertical, every single segment. There just isn't.
It's like poker. You can study the cards, but there's too many humans.
We were just going back and forth on this because like we're creating our AE Mastery course right now, and it's like, you know, how do we tailor this? Like, do we make this for SMBs? Do we make this for mid-market? Do we make this for enterprise? And we were going back and forth so much because it's like, oh wait, but this doesn't work for you, but it works for me. And it's like, so like this just goes to show that everything changes situationally, right? The real recipe for success is going to be internally, to be honest. Like you can look externally as much as you can, but I would say look at that more so as inspiration once you're in a position where, hey, you're at a baseline, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, what other people have historically done internally to hit their number. And again, like you're not making decisions from like the right mindset, right? If you're like 30% to your number and you're just going out there and you're trying to like copy and paste some framework in, it's not going to work, you know? And it's just going to be even worse for you. But if you go out there and you approach it more from a mindset of like, hey, I'm going to try this out. I'm not going to like make it the entire premise of what I'm doing. I'm mostly going to take it and try to distill it into what I'm currently doing and see if it works. But you already have something in place internally based on like the, you know, the research that you've done, the folks that have been before you, all those different things. So I think this was a solid episode. Lots of value. I would just say again, like we're very, very transparent about training. We've sort of like figured out that there isn't a perfect framework. We tried to teach the perfect framework and it didn't work. You know? So now instead what we focus on is like, hey, this is how you figure out what's working. This is how you actually take what's working, make it your own, and this is how you actually have a consistent frame throughout everything that you're doing. That'll be the thing that gets you results. So anyway, 100%. I don't know if you have any
just say
last words.
For anyone watching, like it is Saturday. We do this on nights and weekends, so we'd obviously appreciate a subscribe. But really well said. And I think like one last analogy that came to mind too while you're talking about it is I consider training in the sales sense like an athlete watching film. Right? Like if you don't have the core athletic skills in place, you can watch film all you want and know what your opponent's going to do. But if you run a 4.9 40 and the receiver you're trying to guard runs a 4.2, you're kind of screwed. You know what I mean? And so I think it's the same thing. It's like, you know, ideally, to all the points we've said, it's like there's value in it. Just make sure you compartmentalize, and the value that you're paying is worth it to you in the end. And I think if there's network effects, if there's live coaching, if there are people that are in and around your industry or stage of career, that's kind of the sweet spot. And again, no one perfect answer, but I think we did a great job laying it out. So
this is solid. Anyway, see you all in the next episode of the pod, but this was awesome discussion. So
thanks,
peace, guys.